The station called Meridian Point floated quietly between two systems, a place built for peace talks and nothing else. No weapons were allowed there. No warships could dock within 1,000 miles. It was supposed to be the safest place in this part of the galaxy. Commander Sarah Voss stood near the observation window, watching the stars. She was young for her rank, only 32, but she had earned every stripe on her uniform. Beside her stood Commander Elena Cross, older, calmer, a woman who had spent 15 years talking enemies into peace instead of fighting them. And a few steps away, reviewing reports on a datapad, stood Commander Maya Chen, the station's commanding officer, sharp-eyed and always alert. The three women had worked together for 2 years. They came from different backgrounds. Sarah was a tactical officer, trained for war but placed here to keep the peace. Elena was a diplomat, skilled with words instead of weapons. Maya ran the station itself, making sure every system worked and every visitor followed the rules. Together, they had built something rare, a place where humans and aliens could sit at the same table without fear. Today was supposed to be a simple meeting. Representatives from the Galactic Empire were coming to discuss a border dispute. Nothing new, nothing dangerous, just another day of careful words and careful smiles. "They're late," Sarah said, checking her watch. "They're always late," Elena replied. "It's a power game. Make the other side wait. Make them feel small." Maya looked up from her datapad. "Their shuttle just requested docking clearance. Looks like they're finally here." The Imperial delegation arrived an hour behind schedule. Their leader was a tall alien named Vorin Kath, a man who wore his rank like a crown. He walked through the station with his chin lifted, barely looking at the human staff around him. Behind him came a dozen officers, all dressed in sharp black uniforms, all carrying themselves with the same cold pride. The meeting began in the main conference hall. Sarah, Elena, and Maya sat on one side of the long table. Vorin Kath and his officers sat on the other. For the first hour, things went as expected. There was talk of borders, talk of trade routes, talk of old agreements that needed updating. Elena handled most of the conversation, her voice steady and patient, guiding the discussion away from anger and toward compromise. But something felt wrong. Sarah noticed it first. The Imperial officers kept glancing at each other, exchanging small looks that didn't belong in a normal meeting. Their body language had changed. They weren't listening to Elena's proposals anymore. They were waiting for something. Sarah leaned over and whispered to Maya, "Something's off." Maya nodded slightly. She had noticed too. Under the table, she quietly sent a message to station security, asking them to increase monitoring on the docking bay. The message never got answered. Without warning, the lights in the conference hall flickered. Then the entire station shook, hard enough to throw people from their chairs. Alarms began screaming through every corridor. Sarah grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright, her mind racing through every possibility. A malfunction? An accident? No. The shaking was too controlled, too precise. This was weapons fire. "Report," Maya shouted into her comm. But the channels were full of static and panic. Vorin Kath stood up slowly, and for the first time he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "You should have stayed on your homeworld," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "The galaxy does not owe humanity a seat at any table." Before anyone could respond, the wall behind him exploded inward. Imperial soldiers, hidden aboard a second shuttle that had docked without permission, poured into the room. This was not a diplomatic meeting anymore. It was an ambush. Sarah's training took over instantly. She grabbed Elena and pulled her down behind the table as gunfire tore through the air above them. Maya was already moving, crawling toward the emergency exit, trying to reach the station's defense controls, but Meridian Point had no weapons. It was never built to fight back. An explosion rocked the far side of the room. Sarah felt heat wash over her skin and heard Elena cry out in pain. She turned to see a piece of shrapnel had torn into Elena's shoulder, blood soaking through her uniform instantly. "Stay with me," Sarah said, pressing her hand against the wound. "Stay with me, Elena." Maya reached the control panel, but a second blast threw her backward before she could enter the emergency codes. She hit the floor hard, her vision blurring, pain spreading through her ribs. The attack lasted only 6 minutes. When it was over, the conference hall was destroyed, smoke filling every corner, alarms still wailing through broken speakers. Imperial forces had already retreated, their shuttle disappearing into the darkness of space before station defenses could even attempt to respond. They left as quickly as they came, their message delivered in fire and blood. Sarah survived with minor injuries. Elena was badly wounded, her shoulder shattered, but alive. Maya had 2 broken ribs and a concussion, but she would recover. 12 station staff members were not as fortunate. They did not survive the attack. News of the assault spread through human space within hours. On Earth, in a quiet farmhouse far from any city, an old man sat in his favorite chair, watching the emergency broadcast on an old television. His hands, weathered and scarred, gripped a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The news anchor spoke quickly, listing names of the wounded. When she said the names Sarah Voss, Elena Cross, and Maya Chen, the old man's face did not change. He simply set down his teacup, very slowly, very carefully, on the table beside him. His name, according to old military records long buried and forgotten, was Alexei Volkov. But almost no one alive knew that name. Among the small circle of people who did know him, in whispered conversations and old war stories, he had another name. A name that Special Forces soldiers used to frighten new recruits during training. A name that had not been spoken in active service for over 20 years. Baba Yaga. He had been retired for 2 decades. He had built a quiet life, far from cameras, far from politics, far from war. He had thought that chapter of his life was finished. He had told himself that many times, especially on nights when old memories refused to let him sleep. But some things do not stay buried forever. Some things wait, patient as stone, for the right moment to rise again. Alexei stood up from his chair. He walked to a closet in the back room, one he had not opened in 15 years. Behind old coats and forgotten boxes, there was a small case, locked with a code only he remembered. Inside was not a weapon, not yet. Inside was a single phone, old and outdated, connected to a network that technically no longer existed. He dialed a number from memory. The voice on the other end answered after one ring. "Sir, we didn't expect to hear from you again." "Elena Cross is my daughter," Alexei said quietly. "Sarah Voss trained under me 12 years ago. Maya Chen served under my command in the war, before she ever wore a commander's rank." There was a pause on the line. "Understood, sir. What do you need?" Alexei looked out the window at the quiet farmland, stretching toward the horizon. The same land he had chosen to live his peaceful life upon. "I need everything," he said, "and I need it quietly." Far away, on a hospital bed aboard a repair station, Elena Cross drifted in and out of consciousness, unaware that the storm her father was about to bring down upon the Galactic Empire would soon make the word human mean something entirely different to every alien who heard it. The Empire had fired upon 3 commanders that day. They did not yet understand what they had truly awakened. 20 years is a long time to disappear. Alexei Volkov had used every one of those years well. After the war ended, most soldiers went home and tried to forget. Alexei did the same, but forgetting was never really possible for a man like him. He had spent 30 years of his life training for a single purpose, to be the last thing an enemy ever saw. He had been part of a program most people never learned about. A program that trained soldiers not for large battles, but for small, quiet missions, where one person could change the outcome of a war. The program had a name once, buried deep in old military files. But the soldiers who came out of it were given a different kind of name, by the people who fought alongside them. They called him Baba Yaga, after the old story his grandmother used to tell him as a child, about a witch who lived deep in the forest and punished those who did wrong. Soldiers whispered his name to frighten new recruits. They said he could enter a fortified base and leave without a single alarm sounding. They said he had once ended a 3-year conflict by removing exactly 1 man from a war room, and nothing else. They said many things, and most of them were true. When the war ended, Alexei walked away from it all. He moved to a small farm far from any city, grew vegetables, raised a few animals, and told himself this quiet life was enough. For a while it was. Elena had been young when her father left the service. She grew up watching him work in silence, never asking questions about his past, though she always knew there was more to him than the quiet farmer everyone saw. When she chose to become a diplomat instead of a soldier, Alexei had been proud. He believed peace was a better path than war, and he wanted that for his daughter more than anything. Sarah Voss had trained under him during a short program he taught after retirement, one where he passed on tactical skills to young officers without ever mentioning his old call sign. She had been sharp, disciplined, and unafraid to ask hard questions. He had seen real potential in her, the kind that came once in a decade. Maya Chen had served in his final campaign, back when he still wore a uniform. She had been young then too, barely more than a recruit, but she had shown the kind of calm under pressure that could not be taught. He had personally recommended her for advancement before he retired. 3 women. 3 different parts of his life. All connected to him in ways the Galactic Empire could never have known when they opened fire on Meridian Point. The phone call Alexei made that night reached a man named Dmitry Orlov, once his second-in-command, now working quietly within human military intelligence. Dmitry had not heard that voice in 5 years, but he recognized it instantly. "I need everything," Alexei had said, "and I need it quietly." Dmitry did not ask questions. He understood immediately what this meant. Within human command, there existed a small circle of officers who knew exactly who Alexei Volkov was and what he was capable of. When word reached them that Baba Yaga was stepping out of retirement, no one moved to stop him. Instead, they moved to help him, clearing paths, hiding records, making sure that whatever happened next would leave no trace back to official human forces. This was important. If humanity's government openly attacked the Galactic Empire in retaliation, it could start a war that human forces were not ready to fight. The Empire had more ships, more soldiers, more resources. A direct war would be costly, perhaps impossible to win. But if one man, acting alone, quietly delivered justice to those responsible, there would be no war to fight. There would only be fear, spreading through the Empire's ranks like poison, a fear that would make them think twice before ever attacking humanity again. Dmitry met with 3 other former operators over the next 2 days, men and women who had once served under Alexei and would trust him with their lives without hesitation. None of them needed convincing. When they heard what had happened to Sarah, Elena, and Maya, they were already packing their gear. Alexei left his farm without telling any neighbors where he was going. He left a note for the man who fed his animals, saying only that he would be away for a while on family business. In some ways, this was true. These 3 women were family to him, whether connected by blood or by the deep bond that forms between a soldier and those he has trained and protected. His first stop was a hidden facility 2 hours outside the city, an old bunker left over from the war, one that officially no longer existed on any map. Inside, Dmitry and the others had already begun preparing. Weapons that had not been touched in decades were checked and cleaned. Old uniforms, stripped of any identifying marks, were laid out. Star charts showing Imperial territory were pulled up on old screens, updated with whatever intelligence Dmitry's contacts could gather. The attack came from the Koth faction, Dmitry explained, pointing to a star map showing a distant Imperial system. Voron Koth ordered it personally. He's been pushing for a harder stance against neutral human territories for years. This attack was meant to send a message that the Empire does not respect human sovereignty. Alexei studied the map without expression, and his superiors, officially, they're calling it a rogue action. Unofficially, we believe there are officers above Kath who approved this quietly, wanting to test human resolve without directly starting a war. Then we start with Kath, Alexei said, and we work upward from there. Over the following days, Alexei trained harder than he had in 20 years. His body was older now, slower in some ways, but experience had a way of making up for lost speed. He ran through old drills, testing his reflexes, rebuilding the muscle memory that had once made him the most feared operative in human military history. His hands remembered things his mind had almost let go of. Meanwhile, far away, news of the attack continued spreading across human space. Politicians debated how to respond. Some pushed for military action, others urged caution, fearing exactly the kind of war human forces could not win. The debates went in circles, accomplishing nothing, while the 3 wounded commanders recovered slowly in a hospital far from Earth. Elena Cross woke up on the 3rd day after the attack, her shoulder wrapped tightly, pain still sharp beneath the medication. Sarah sat beside her bed, exhausted but unharmed enough to walk on her own. "How bad is it?" Elena asked quietly. "Bad enough," Sarah admitted. "But you're going to be fine." Maya's already trying to get out of her bed to check on station repairs, even with 2 broken ribs. Elena managed a small, tired smile. That sounds like her. Then her smile faded. "Sarah, this wasn't random. Voron Koth meant to kill us. Why?" Sarah's expression darkened. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Neither of them knew that far across human space, an old man they both respected and loved was already preparing to answer that question for them, in a way that no diplomat or soldier ever could. Back at the hidden bunker, Alexei looked over final preparations with Dmitri. Weapons were packed. A small, fast ship, stripped of any identifying markings, sat ready in a hidden hangar. Intelligence on Koth's movements had been gathered from old contacts throughout the Empire, humans and aliens alike who owed Alexei favors from the war, or who simply believed the Empire had gone too far this time. Once you cross into Imperial territory, there's no turning back, Dmitri said. If they catch you, there will be no rescue. No one can save you if this goes wrong. Alexei checked the weapon at his side, an old but well-maintained sidearm that had once ended conflicts before they could properly begin. I'm counting on them not catching me. Dmitri studied his old commander for a long moment. Alexei looked tired in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion, but his eyes held the same sharp focus Dmitri remembered from decades ago. This was not a man seeking revenge for its own sake. This was a man restoring balance to something that had been broken. Good luck, sir, Dmitri said. Alexei nodded once, then walked toward the waiting ship. Behind him, the bunker doors closed silently, hiding all evidence that anything had ever happened there. As his ship lifted off into the darkness of space, Alexei allowed himself one quiet thought before focusing entirely on the mission ahead. Somewhere out there, Voroncrath believed he had sent a message to humanity that would never be answered. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The imperial capital of the Koth sector sat on a planet called Visara, a world of tall silver towers and endless military parades. It was a place built to show strength, every building designed to remind visitors that the Galactic Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds and lost to none. Voroncrath ruled this sector like a king, answering only to the distant Imperial Council, and even then, only when it suited him. 3 days after the attack on Meridian Point, Koth sat in his private chambers, drinking from a crystal glass, listening to reports from his officers. The attack had gone exactly as planned. Human command had made angry statements, but no military response had come. No warships had gathered at the border. No declarations of war had been issued. "They are exactly as weak as I predicted," Koth said to his second-in-command, a sharp-featured officer named Tessic. "All words, no action. This confirms what I have always believed. Humanity does not belong at any negotiating table. They are children playing at being a galactic power." Tessic nodded in agreement, though something in his expression suggested less certainty than his words implied. "The Imperial Council has asked for a full report on the incident, sir. Some members are concerned about the political consequences." Koth waved his hand dismissively. "The Council worries too much. In 1 month, this will be forgotten. Humanity will return to their small corner of space, chastised and quiet, and we will have secured our border without losing a single ship." What Voroncrath did not know, and could not have known, was that somewhere beyond the edge of his sector, a small, unmarked ship was already crossing into Imperial territory, carrying a man the galaxy had never heard of, but who human soldiers had feared and respected, in equal measure for 30 years. Alexei's ship moved slowly through the outer edges of Imperial space, using old smuggling routes that Dmitri's contacts had mapped out years ago. These routes existed in the gaps between Imperial patrol schedules, forgotten paths used by traders and spies, long before the current conflict began. Alexei's ship carried no weapon systems, no shields, nothing that would register as a threat on any scanner. It looked exactly like what it was meant to look like, an old cargo hauler, unremarkable and unworthy of attention. He traveled for 6 days before reaching the outer edge of the Koth sector. During this time, he received updates from Dmitri through a secure channel, information gathered from contacts within Imperial space itself. Some of these contacts were humans who had settled in Imperial territory long ago, trying to build peaceful lives among the stars. Others were aliens themselves, quiet dissenters who disagreed with Koth's aggressive policies and were willing to share information with anyone who might hold him accountable. "Koth rarely leaves Visara," Dmitri reported. "He has heavy security, but there's a pattern to his schedule. Every evening, he reviews reports alone in his private chambers, with only 2 guards outside his door. It's the only time he's not surrounded by dozens of officers." Alexei studied the information carefully. 2 guards was nothing. He had once slipped past 12 guards to reach a war criminal hiding in a fortified bunker, all without raising a single alarm. But Alexei knew that Koth was not the final target, only the beginning. Above Koth sat officers who had quietly approved the attack, believing they could test humanity's resolve without consequence. Removing Kath alone would send a message, but it would not address the deeper problem. The message needed to reach higher, to those who believed humanity could be attacked without any real cost. He decided on a different approach. Rather than eliminating Kath immediately, he would gather proof of exactly who had approved the attack, then ensure that information reached both human command and the Imperial Council itself. Justice delivered quietly was one thing. Justice delivered with undeniable proof was something the Empire could not dismiss as an isolated incident. Alexei's ship docked at a supply station near the edge of Visara's orbit, disguised among dozens of other cargo vessels making routine deliveries. From there, he moved on foot, blending into the crowds of traders, workers, and low-level officials that filled the station daily. His face was unremarkable, his clothing plain, his manner calm and unhurried. No one looked twice at an old man carrying a simple bag through a busy trade station. Over the following 2 days, Alexei moved carefully through Visara's lower districts, gathering information, watching patterns, learning the rhythms of the city. He visited a small tea house run by a Torvani trader named Sten, an old contact from years ago who had once helped human forces during the war in exchange for protection for his family. "You have not aged well, my friend," Sten said quietly, pouring tea for them both in the back room of his shop. "None of us do," Alexei replied. "I need access to Imperial administrative records, specifically anything relating to authorization for military action against neutral human territories." Sten's expression grew serious. "This is dangerous information to seek, even for someone like you. Kath's attack on Meridian Point was not entirely his own decision. There are whispers that someone within the Imperial Council itself gave quiet approval, wanting to test human response without directly ordering it." "Names," Alexei said simply. Sten hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I can get you what you need, but it will take time, and it will cost more than money." "Whatever it costs," Alexei said, "I will pay it." Over the next several days, Sten's network of contacts within Visara's administrative offices worked quietly to gather the proof Alexei needed. Records were copied in small pieces, carried by low-level clerks who did not fully understand what they were transporting, passed hand to hand until they reached Sten's shop hidden among crates of imported tea leaves. The evidence, once assembled, painted a clear picture. Voron Kath had indeed ordered the attack directly, but he had done so with the quiet approval of a council member named Draith Valen, an influential figure who had long argued for more aggressive imperial policies toward emerging species. Valen had specifically suggested testing human resolve through a controlled incident, believing that humanity would not respond with force, thereby proving they were unworthy of continued diplomatic respect. Alexei read through the documents carefully, his expression unreadable. This was worse than he had expected. This was not a rogue commander acting alone, but a calculated test designed by someone with real influence within the Empire's highest circles. He contacted Dmitri through the secure channel, sending the evidence back to human command. "Send this to every diplomatic channel we still maintain with neutral Imperial factions," Alexei instructed. "Let them see exactly what their own leadership has done in their name." Meanwhile, back on the hospital station, Elena Cross had recovered enough to sit up in bed, her shoulder healing slowly but steadily. Sarah visited her daily, sharing whatever information trickled in through official human channels, though neither of them yet knew about Alexei's mission unfolding quietly across Imperial space. "Command is being strangely quiet about this," Sarah mentioned one afternoon, frustration clear in her voice. "No public statements, no military buildup, nothing. It's like they're waiting for something." Elena frowned, thinking back to childhood memories she rarely spoke of. Her father had always been quiet in exactly this way, calm on the surface while working carefully towards something larger beneath. She said nothing about this feeling to Sarah, uncertain if it meant anything at all, but a small part of her began to wonder. Back on Visara, Alexei prepared for his next move. With Volan's involvement now confirmed and documented, he needed to ensure that Kath and Volan both faced consequences precise enough to serve as an unmistakable warning, yet controlled enough to avoid triggering full-scale war between humanity and the Empire. He visited Kath's private residence under cover of night, studying the security patterns Dimitri's information had described. Everything matched exactly as reported. 2 guards outside the private chambers each evening, minimal security elsewhere in the building, confidence born from decades of unchallenged power. Alexei watched from a rooftop across the street, patient as stone, waiting for the right moment. He had waited 20 years for a mission like this to matter again. He could wait a few more hours to do it correctly. As night fell fully over Visara's silver towers, Alexei moved from his position, slipping silently through shadows toward Koth's residence. The guards outside stood at attention, unaware that the man they feared without knowing his name was now close enough to touch. Inside his private chambers, Voron Koth poured himself another drink, confident that his message to humanity had been delivered successfully, confident that no consequence would ever reach him. He had no idea that consequence was already standing outside his door. The two guards outside Voron Koth's chambers had stood this same watch for 3 years. Nothing ever happened. Visara was the safest planet in the sector, protected by fleets, patrols, and the simple fact that no one would dare attack the seat of imperial power. Their job had become routine, almost ceremonial. Neither of them saw Alexei approach. He did not rush. He did not hide behind corners or move in sudden bursts. He simply walked with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged, timing his steps with the shift change happening 2 levels below, using the brief confusion of guards rotating positions to slip past monitoring stations that had gone unwatched for only 40 seconds. 40 seconds was enough. By the time the new guards took their positions outside Koth's door, Alexei was already inside, hidden within a maintenance corridor that ran behind the private chambers, a passage that appeared on no official building schematic, but had been used by Imperial cleaning staff for generations. Sten's contacts had found record of it in old maintenance logs, forgotten by security decades ago. Alexei waited in the darkness of the corridor, listening. Through the thin wall, he could hear Koth speaking to someone, his voice carrying the same arrogant confidence Alexei had heard about from every report. And once the Council sees how easily humanity backed down, Volan's position will be secure, Koth was saying. This entire matter will be forgotten within a season. And if human command decides to respond militarily after all? A second voice asked, one Alexei recognized from intelligence reports as Tessic, Koth's second in command. Koth laughed. With what? They have no fleet capable of challenging us. They have no allies willing to risk conflict on their behalf. They have nothing but anger, and anger without power means nothing in this galaxy. Alexei found a small hidden panel in the wall, exactly where old schematics indicated, and opened it silently. Behind it lay a narrow gap between walls, just wide enough for a person to move through carefully. He entered without a sound, moving toward a second access point that led directly into Koth's private office. Tessic left the room a few minutes later, and Koth remained alone, exactly as his evening pattern always followed. He sat behind his desk, reviewing reports on a glowing screen, entirely unaware that the wall panel behind his bookshelf had begun to shift silently open. When Alexei stepped into the room, Koth did not notice him at first. He continued reading his reports, confident and relaxed in what he believed was complete privacy. Voron Koth, Alexei said quietly. Koth looked up sharply, his hand moving instinctively toward a weapon in his desk drawer. But Alexei was already there, closing the distance faster than a man his age should have been able to move, pressing Koth's hand flat against the desk before it could reach the weapon. I would not do that, Alexei said calmly. Koth stared at the old human standing before him, confusion and fear mixing in his expression. Who are you? How did you get in here? My name does not matter to you, Alexei replied, but you should know why I am here. 3 women were injured when you ordered the attack on Meridian Point. One of them is my daughter, another was my student. The third served under my command many years ago. Understanding began to spread across Koth's face, followed quickly by disbelief. This is impossible. Human command would never authorize an assassin to enter Imperial territory. This would mean war. Human command did not send me, Alexei said. I came on my own. There is a difference, and it is a difference that matters greatly for what happens next. Koth's eyes darted toward the door, calculating whether he could call for help before this stranger acted. Alexei noticed the movement immediately. Your guards will not hear anything unusual, he said. I am not here to kill you, Voron Koth. Killing you would only create a martyr, and give your council an excuse for open war. Instead, I am here to make sure you understand something important. He released Koth's hand and stepped back slightly, though his presence still filled the room with quiet, controlled danger. I know about Draith Volan, Alexei continued. I know he suggested this attack as a test of human resolve. I know you carried out his suggestion, believing there would be no consequences. You were wrong. Kath's face paled. How do you know this? That does not matter. What matters is this. The evidence of Volan's involvement has already been sent to every diplomatic channel. Human command still maintains, including several factions within your own empire who disagree with his aggressive policies. Within a day, the entire galaxy will know that your council authorized an attack on a neutral peace station, killing 12 people, in order to test whether humanity would fight back. You're bluffing, Kath said. Though uncertainty had crept into his voice, Alexei placed a small data drive on the desk, one containing copies of everything Sten's network had gathered. I am not. Kath stared at the drive as though it might explode. What do you want from me? I want you to remember this moment, Alexei said. I want you to remember that an old man walked past your guards, entered your private chambers, and stood before you, without any weapon drawn, simply to deliver a message. I want you to understand that humanity is not weak, and it is not without protection, even when official forces choose to remain quiet. The next time someone in your empire considers testing human resolve through violence, I want you to be the one who tells them what happened here tonight. And if I refuse to spread this story? Alexei's expression did not change. Then the evidence speaks for itself, and you will answer to your own council for what you have done. Either way, the truth is already loose in the galaxy. There is nothing you can do to stop it now. Kath sat in silence for a long moment, processing the situation slowly. This stranger had walked through the most secure building on Visara without triggering a single alarm. If human forces had operators capable of this, then perhaps humanity was not as weak or unprepared as he had believed. Who are you? Kath asked again, quieter this time. Alexei considered the question. 20 years of silence had protected his identity from the galaxy, but perhaps it was time for a small piece of the truth to be known, at least to this one man, who needed to understand the weight of what he had unleashed. Among my own people, Alexei said, there is a name whispered by soldiers to frighten new recruits during training. A story of a shadow that enters where it is not wanted, and leaves before anyone notices. They call this shadow Baba Yaga. Kath's eyes widened slightly. He had heard fragments of this name before, mentioned briefly in old intelligence reports about human military history, dismissed at the time as mere legend or propaganda. That name is a myth, Kath said. Most believe it is, Alexei agreed. That belief has served humanity well for many years. I suggest you keep that belief useful, rather than testing whether it holds any truth. Without another word, Alexei turned and disappeared back through the hidden panel, leaving Kath alone in his office, staring at the small data drive on his desk, his earlier confidence completely shattered. By morning, word had begun spreading quietly through Visara's administrative circles. Someone had entered Kath's private chambers without detection. Evidence proving Volan's involvement in an unauthorized attack had reached diplomatic channels throughout human and neutral territories. Whispers began circulating among Imperial officers, questions about how such security had been breached so easily, and by whom. Tessic, arriving for his morning briefing, found Kath sitting exactly where he had left him the night before, staring blankly at his desk. Sir, is everything all right? Kath did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its usual arrogant confidence. Send word to the council, he said quietly. Tell them Volan's plan has failed completely. Tell them humanity is not what we believe them to be. Across the Empire, within military circles that dealt with classified intelligence, old dismissed reports about human special forces programs were suddenly being reviewed again, this time with far greater seriousness. A single question began spreading through private conversations among Imperial officers, one that had no clear answer. If Baba Yaga was real, what else had humanity kept hidden from the galaxy all this time? Word of what happened in Voran Kath's private chambers spread through the Imperial court faster than anyone could contain it. Within 3 days, the story had transformed from whispered rumor into a full political crisis. Volan found himself summoned before an emergency session of the Imperial Council, forced to answer for evidence that proved beyond doubt his role in authorizing the attack on Meridian Point. Volan tried to defend himself, arguing that testing human resolve had been a reasonable strategic decision, that no one could have predicted such information would ever become public. But the council members, many of whom had opposed his aggressive policies for years, saw an opportunity they had long waited for. Volan was stripped of his position within the week. His influence over Imperial military policy ended completely. Voran Kath, though he retained his rank, found himself reassigned to a distant outer sector, far from any position of real power, his reputation quietly ruined among his peers. But the political fallout was only part of what changed within the Empire. The other part, the part that spread through military circles like a slow-burning fire, was fear. Officers who had once dismissed humanity as weak now found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew. Old intelligence files on human special forces programs, long buried and forgotten, were pulled from archives and studied carefully. Stories that had once seemed like exaggerated legend now seemed disturbingly plausible. If one human operator, acting entirely alone, could walk through the most secure building on the imperial capital without triggering a single alarm, what did that say about the ones the galaxy had never heard about at all? The name Baba Yaga began appearing in classified reports across multiple imperial sectors, no longer dismissed as myth, but studied as a genuine unknown threat. No one could confirm who he was, what he looked like, or how many others like him might exist within human military ranks. This uncertainty proved far more effective than any show of force could have been. Fear of the unknown spread faster and lasted longer than fear of any visible fleet. Aboard the hospital station, Elena Cross continued her slow recovery, her shoulder healing well enough that doctors expected a full return to duty within a month. Sarah Voss visited daily, and Maya Chen, now out of her own hospital bed despite doctors' objections, spent her time reviewing security reports and station repairs. It was Elena who first received the message, a simple, unsigned note delivered through old diplomatic channels she barely remembered existed, channels her father had once used during his own service decades ago. The note contained only a few words. "The matter has been addressed. Rest well. Your father sends his love." Elena read the message 3 times before setting it down slowly, understanding beginning to dawn on her. She thought back to childhood memories of her father's quiet strength, his calm manner that always seemed to hide something deeper beneath the surface. She had never fully understood what he had done during his years of service, only that he carried himself differently than other men she had known. "What is it?" Sarah asked, noticing Elena's expression. Elena hesitated before answering. "I think my father just ended a war before it could start." Sarah frowned in confusion, but Elena said nothing more, folding the note carefully and keeping the truth close to her heart, exactly as her father had always kept his own truths hidden. Meanwhile, Alexei's journey home took him through the same quiet smuggling routes he had used to enter Imperial space, his unmarked cargo ship drawing no attention as it slipped back across the border into neutral territory. Dmitri met him personally when he finally returned to the hidden bunker, relief clear on his old friend's face. "It's done," Alexei said simply, setting down his bag. "The reports are already coming in," Dmitri replied. "Volun has been removed from power. Koth has been reassigned to the edge of nowhere, and every Imperial military circle is quietly terrified of a man whose name most of them still believe is nothing more than a story." Alexei allowed himself a small, tired smile. Let them keep believing that. A story is far more useful than the truth. "Command wants to know if you'll consider staying active," Dmitri said carefully. "After this, there will be others who study what happened, other threats that emerge. They could use someone like you again." Alexei shook his head slowly. "I did what needed to be done for my family. That is finished now. I have no interest in becoming a weapon for anyone's larger political games." Dmitri nodded, understanding completely. Some soldiers fought for command, for country, for cause. Alexei had only ever truly fought for the people directly in front of him, the ones he loved and had sworn to protect. That mission was now complete. 3 weeks later, Sarah, Elena, and Maya stood together aboard a repaired Meridian Point, watching new construction crews finish restoring the station to full operation. All 3 had recovered well enough to return to active duty, though none of them would ever forget what had happened in that conference hall. Elena had finally told Sarah and Maya the truth about her father, sharing carefully selected pieces of his history, enough to help them understand, without revealing everything the old man had done. Sarah listened with quiet amazement, remembering her old tactical instructor with new understanding. Maya simply nodded, unsurprised, having always sensed there was more to Alexei Volkov than the quiet retired officer he had once claimed to be during her early service years. "So he really just walked into the most protected building in the entire empire," Sarah said, disbelief still coloring her voice even weeks later. "And walked back out again," Elena confirmed, without a single alarm sounding. Maya looked out at the stars beyond the station's rebuilt observation window. The galaxy really has no idea what humanity is capable of, do they? That's exactly how my father always wanted it, Elena said quietly. Let them underestimate us. Let them believe we are weak and unprepared. That belief has protected us far more than any show of strength ever could. Far away, back on his quiet farm, Alexei Volkov returned to his simple life exactly as he had left it. He fed his animals each morning, tended his small garden each afternoon, and sat in his favorite chair each evening, watching the sunset stretch across land he had chosen for its silence and peace. Occasionally, late at night, old military contacts would send him quiet updates through secure channels, informing him of continued whispers spreading through imperial military circles, stories about a shadow that could not be predicted, controlled, or truly understood. Alexei read these reports with mild interest before deleting them completely, uninterested in the growing legend his single mission had created. He had not sought fame. He had not sought war. He had only sought justice for 3 women, who mattered more to him than any galactic reputation or political outcome ever could. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Elena would call him from her post aboard Meridian Point, and they would talk about small things, about her recovery, about station repairs, about nothing important at all. Neither of them ever spoke directly about what had happened in Voronkoth's private chambers that night. Some truths were better left unspoken, understood quietly, between a father and daughter who trusted each other completely. Across the galaxy, the Empire adjusted its policies carefully in the months that followed. Aggressive stances toward neutral human territories quietly disappeared from official strategic planning. No formal apology was ever issued, no public acknowledgement of what had truly happened. But within private council chambers, a new understanding had taken root, one that would influence imperial policy toward humanity for generations to come. Humanity was young among the galaxy's civilizations, inexperienced in many ways, still learning the complex politics of interstellar diplomacy. But beneath that youth lay something far older and more dangerous than most species had ever considered: quiet patience, careful preparation, and a willingness to protect their own that no show of force could ever fully measure or predict. The Galactic Empire had fired upon 3 female commanders that day at Meridian Point, believing humanity too weak and unprepared to respond. They had learned, in the quietest way possible, exactly how wrong that belief truly was. And somewhere in the depths of imperial military archives, buried among thousands of forgotten files, a single name remained, whispered occasionally among officers who still could not quite believe it was real: Baba Yaga, a story, a legend, a warning. And, if the galaxy was wise, a lesson they would never need to learn